GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net.
Hello and welcome to the GrowCFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and this week I've got with me Chris Wright, who is Managing Director and lead of Protiviti's Global Finance Transformation Solution. But the reason we've got Chris on the show today is not to talk about finance transformation, it's to talk about the risks survey that Protiviti have put together, highlighting the risks that companies are seeing in the marketplace at the moment, particularly that you as finance leaders need to think about being in a position of acknowledging, evaluating and mitigating in the coming 12 months. So, Chris, welcome to the GrowCFO Show.
Kevin, it's great to be with you this morning.
Chris, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm Managing Director with Protiviti Consult. I lead a solution we call business performance improvement. And that focuses on the needs of CFOs, chief operating officers, and chief human resources officers. Also would be described aptly as dealing with finance, operations, people, and change. And in this particular instance, as you point out, I lead the finance transformation team. That's a part of that as well.
Okay, that's brilliant. So I can really associate with that, having done similar sort of work in PwC and then smaller consultancies, and being the finance person, often leading a finance transformation or being the finance guy on the more generalist project. So yeah, thoroughly understand your world. Chris, you've produced this top risk survey. Tell me a little bit about that.
So it's one of our annual surveys. Protiviti does several sort of keystone surveys throughout the year. Top risks is where we interview C-suite or C-suite adjacent executives and board members and ask them a series of questions about their outlook over the coming 2 to 3 years, and then their outlook over the 10-year horizon as well, just to get a sense of what concerns them, what's on their mind, what areas are getting their focus, their time, their attention, their energy, interest from stakeholders such as employees, shareholders, insurers, lenders, investors, and the like, and also where they're going to spend their time and attention and focus their funding and make investments and hope to generate returns on those investments. So it's a broad-based view about risks that gleans a lot of information from a lot of people. So this is not a small survey. This is over 1,200 respondents.
Wow.
So it's not Protiviti telling us what people should think or do. We're passing along what about 1,200 people told us is on their mind.
Okay, so this is really a survey that we should be sitting up and taking notice of, because this is what the real world is saying. Now, I'm looking at the overview of that survey at the moment, and the thing that I see right at the top of that list, economic conditions, including inflation pressures. And we're recording this on the 12th of March. I can't say at the moment what date we're going to publish, but today on the BBC News here in the UK was serious stuff this morning about duties being imposed on Europe putting those trade tariffs back onto the United States on certain goods, markets really rocking because of the uncertainties around, and nobody can predict what's going on economically. Are these tariffs real? Are these tariffs going to go away again? Talk of people not being able to plan. Is that the sort of feedback that you're getting as you put this survey together?
Well, Kevin, it's the feedback we're getting as we present the results of the survey in real time. Timestamping the survey, this was taken in the latter part of the fourth quarter of 2024. And so our respondents are either very prescient about what could be coming, or more likely, because this is on the economic conditions and inflationary pressures are not only on the 2 to 3 year outlook, but on the 10-year outlook. It seems more like they are forever risks, if you will. They're the sort of thing, because fluctuation is the issue, not necessarily growing inflation, but changing inflation, not necessarily growing tariffs, but changing tariffs. So the fluctuation, the change, and the need to keep an eye on it seem to be wise areas on which the C-suite executives can and should be focused and are focused.
Yeah.
It's particularly when you phrase when we ask a question in the context of an outlook, it's a major unknown. And clearly, if you're a CFO, it affects practically everything you do, right? Your ability to forecast, plan, budget, price, contribute to the thought process inside the company, not just about reporting the financial results, but doing some of the cost accounting and coming up with what the pricing structure should be. So not only what you're paying for services and for employees, but what you're going to charge. And it really has an impact. And in a global company, the impact of a tariff, for example, might be high in one and low in the other. It could offset or it could be exacerbated by being in the wrong places or all the right places. And so it creates a dynamic that clearly requires focus and scrutiny. So we're not surprised to see it. We always wonder what's going to be number one versus number two, but it's clearly something we would expect to see top five probably every time we ask.
And I think just the way you've explained that makes a lot of sense to me. It's not that the risk is economic conditions could be bad. It's the risk that loads of things may change. Therefore, we don't know what the economic conditions are going to be. Therefore, we cannot realistically forecast for them. If we can't realistically forecast for them, how on earth do we make the right decisions?
That's the CFO prism on all of this. It's the fact that things could vary or fluctuate and do so in unexpected ways. If you think about the muscle memory that CFOs and controllers and the people that report to them have developed, beginning with the pandemic when reforecasting became practically a daily exercise, and then say mid 2023 and following when inflation crept into the lexicon and started being part of the discussion. Again, this is a US dynamic, but typically these are global events. What wasn't a factor became a factor. What we're finding, though, is that the executives have at least developed good skills, approaches, programs, processes, tools, data analysis techniques, and employee skills around being able to do that forecasting, to do that planning, to do that advising more regularly than they used to. The velocity, the frequency of requests for data, financial and non-financial, I would add, right? If you think, Kevin, about the CFO's remit, cyber disclosures for US public companies became part of the conversation with an SEC rule that requires you to describe your program and then evaluate incidents for materiality, notwithstanding variability in the regulations, say CSRD in Europe or a US SEC regulation that is likely to never take effect, likely to be repealed before it takes effect. Over 90% of public companies are disclosing some kind of ESG data, which is non-financial, but also the CFO's area because it's data and it needs to be consistent. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be timely. It needs to be relevant and it needs to be audited or auditable, right? So if you think about all the things that are out there that could change, whether it's the rules around what you report or shareholder demands or customer demands or employee demands, it's the financial and non-financial data and the change, the fluctuation. Cyber, for example, has been on a CFO's and an executive's watch list probably for the last 10 years. It made number 2 on top risks. It was the number 1 area in our CFO only survey, our finance trend survey. They were taken months apart, but it was a question for CFOs, but their answer was cyber. Interestingly, none of their answers were about a new accounting pronouncement or an accounting or reporting issue. It was all about data analysis, economic analysis that allows for forecasting around what CFOs do with the data as part of the management structure, rather than what they might historically be considered in terms of simply reporting the news or trying to impact the news or trying to drive the direction of the company.
And that's really encouraging, Chris, because the reporting the news, you don't drive a car looking through the rearview mirror. But that's what you do when you're reporting financial information. You're always looking backwards. And I think in this day and age, you can pretty much say, well, whatever reporting requirements come along, we've probably got the data somewhere that's going to fulfill that requirement. We just have to do some stuff to put it in the right format to report it. We're much more interested in taking the business forward into the future. And therefore, as CFOs and our teams, we need to be focused more on what's going to happen than what happened in the past.
I should point out that it is for CFOs, perhaps unlike no other, it's an and statement, not an or statement. They also must report the results, and those must be accurate and consistent and in accordance with the accounting principles. Something's added to their list, very little comes off. And so you see in the risks survey, what are some of their other concerns? It's their own departmental performance, availability of labor and talent, the ability to attract and retain the right people, because they're adding to their remit without taking anything off. And so they need not only an accountant, but perhaps somebody who is a bit of a data scientist. When you think about all that data, if you will, that's in a company, the need for one source of the truth, particularly on the non-financial data for which the CFO is responsible, sometimes whether she likes it or not, It's just that if you're a public company in the US and other venues, typically two people sign the annual report. There's a CEO or an equivalent title, general manager, and there's a CFO or a finance director. Who do you think's responsible for the numbers, no matter what they are, whether they've got a euro sign in front of them or just a comma after them and they're
It's
not?
always going to stop with the CFO because
Right.
the other person has probably only had the numbers explained to them. They
Right.
weren't part of the process of putting the numbers together and weren't responsible for the team that directly put them together. So yeah, that's always going to be the case.
They're also the audit whisperer a little bit. They know how to be audited. They're audited at least annually, sometimes quarterly. And so when you think about having to produce and curate data that is accurate and can be subject to audit, they know what it takes. And they're often training people in their organization who are not necessarily used to that on what you need to create and preserve and curate, data manage and govern so that it could survive scrutiny, an audit question, a comfort letter, any kind of procedure where somebody seeks to verify or provide assurance on the non-financial data. So they find themselves in an audit training role quite often, working with internal audit departments.
So, Chris, we've got that economic conditions top of the list. We've touched on the cyber threat sitting second on the list, but risks 3, 4, and 5 in this report, as I'm looking at them, are all about labor.
Yes.
You've touched on it. Ability to attract, develop, and retain top talent is the first of those. Just plain the talent and labor availability is the next one, and increases in labor cost is the third. Now, I hear over and over again, there's a shortage of finance people coming through the system. Is that significantly worse than any other discipline that companies are typically recruiting in?
We think it might be. Our parent company is Robert Half, and we often get survey data from them on what people are doing in terms of hiring. And just reflecting solely on United States unemployment statistics, for example, if U.S. unemployment hovers just below 4%, in accounting, it's about half that. And in certain roles, it's 1%, which is for all intents and purposes, zero. That could be timing. And so the other thing is a number of people sitting for the CPA exam in the United States for the first time was something like 300,000 less than it was 7 or 8 years ago, which is it. And so you're seeing in response to that, perhaps in the United States, the CPA requirement for a fifth year is state by state, but all 50 states adopted it. But 2 states now, Ohio and Virginia, appear to be repealing that. And that may perhaps increase the pool of potential accountants by reducing the fact that you'll need a fifth year in school to get to it. But what's interesting is that, again, in top risks, they're talking about all labor costs. In our finance trend survey, it was in the top 5 as well for CFOs about their own departments. So they're thinking about their own departments as well. What we see, though, it's an interesting dynamic at play. AI in the finance trend survey was the number 15 issue. It didn't make our top 10, but we tracked the top 15 so we can track last year's top 10 to see what might have moved off. It's only because we asked the question in the context of not are you talking about it, because everybody's talking about AI, but are you using AI? And just over a third of the respondents said that they were using AI in their finance function. I would add with a thought bubble afterwards, perhaps that you know of, because there may be things they're doing that they don't realize are AI, where there's sort of online cash application and certain things in virtual lockboxes, certain mundane activities and payables or receivables. So what we're seeing is they find that 2/3 of the people who reported using AI reported that it was saving them money through automation, through the ability to streamline processes. And so that may allow an accounting or finance function to deal with the lack of supply of employees by using AI to offset some of the more mundane capabilities. It enriches the accounting department staff's work experience because then they're not preparing data, they're spending their time analyzing it. And we think it also creates a potential partnership in finance organizations in particular between the new entrants to the workforce who might know how to use AI tools. They've studied it, they've played with it, if you will, in an academic environment, they've tried it out. And the senior leadership of finance organizations who are not as current on that. The finance leaders can provide direction on what to do with AI, how to curate it, how to govern it, how to control it, how not to use it. And the newer entrants to the workforce in finance in particular can actually show how to use it. As a result, and our parent company doing their surveys on employee titles see a lot of people adding AI in the front of job descriptions, but they have to change the job description. But they're also seeing that in accounting, for example, a CFO or a controller hiring a new accountant or an experienced hire, they probably won't accept no accounting skill. They might accept a little bit less accounting skills because they can teach that if the person brings AI to the table. as a skill. Yeah. So we think AI is a way for finance functions to address their number of those. So think about all three items, right? The cost of labor, that person probably costs more. So that probably doesn't go away, but it might allow to retain the people in finance maybe longer than the usual year or two they stay if their job is more interesting because they're also a data scientist. So it could help with retention, and it could also help with attracting people in the first place. Because the labor pool in finance has shrunk, it may grow back, but it has shrunk. There are some signs that maybe more people are taking accounting now in the first year of college. So they've started university, but that takes a few years to bleed into the employment pool. So there's a lot going on, but we think the AI labor interplay in finance in particular is not only worth watching, but worth CFOs giving some serious thought to how it can help them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fascinating area to keep an eye on, Chris. Certainly we're seeing in the UK, and we work closely with a recruitment agency that works both in London and New York, so we know it's a similar problem on both sides of the Atlantic, that are saying in particular it's the FP&A type of skill set that's in short supply. And the area that's probably got the biggest growth in finance is FP&A. I'm heartened by the fact that nearly all of the FP&A tools out there are talking about having some element of AI built into them to make them better, to help clean the data, to help structure the data. So hopefully this is all moving in the right way.
Well, it's interesting. The FP&A is sort of another one of those rivers that runs through a lot of these questions. Think about in both the CFO outlook and top risks and in our own finance priority survey. And actually in the finance priority survey, it was the number 2 issue behind cyber. But the economic conditions, labor costs, labor retention, labor availability, third-party risks, regulatory change, and data analytics of the top 10 of our top risks, all of those have an FP&A adjacency or direct hit. AI, in terms of finance use cases, clearly there is the ability to use it in what the world calls FP&A, what we try to call BP&A, business planning and analysis, sort of a higher state of that where you anchor everything to the strategic plan and then you're not doing two. But the thoughts are you can use it just to do some of the rudimentary work in FP&A around keying off the differences and the percentages and maybe even taking a stab at gathering market data for what might be the reason why something either went up or might go up or down. For variance analysis, what we don't think AI has a role necessarily yet, it can't be dispositive. It has to be a data point. Nobody would be advised or advisable to sort of rely totally on AI to figure out what their sales forecast is for next year. But what it can do is go do some scouring and some research for you and pull in data sources you might not have sought to give you more information. And so it can be powerful as an exercise in FP&A. And as you point out, most of the FP&A tools that either are standalone or come with an ERP either have or promise to have or are testing an AI component.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be a major help for us in the future. But the survey says emergence of new risks from implementing AI. What do you think those new risks are likely to be?
Well, a number of things. In fact, didn't necessarily make the top 10, but it was in the outlook strategic risks for the next 10 years. Similar, by the way, to our CFO survey where people are talking about a third were using it. I think CFOs and executives view it as because it's emerging, it's something that they need to keep on their horizon for 10 years. What are some of the risks? AI brings with it a serious cyber risk component. You are data is entering and exiting the entity if you don't have a closed loop GPT function. And there could be concerns about inadvertent leaks or exposing through clicking on all the usual phishing and spear phishing and hacking. The use of AI exposes you to more links to click, more perimeter threat on the cyber front. So there is that risk. There's a risk of AI being accurate. It is, after all, machine learning. The machine was taught by somebody. Maybe not all the data is correct. There are some cases out there of attorneys citing legal cases in court briefs using AI that turned out the case never existed. So there's that risk of over-reliance or of the data quality. There is a risk of, if you use it in an FP&A context, it giving you bad advice, if you will. But there's also that risk in what we just spoke about. There's the risk of being able to find enough people with the skills to help you operate it or commercialize it. AI has revenue generation implications for many organizations and cost cutting implications for many organizations. And then it's not cheap. There's a potential need to, when you think about cost savings from a CFO perspective, one of the best ways to save some money is to rationalize or maximize the use of your tech stack. And so on a scale from expensive word processor to using all the functionality of your ERP, you probably want to be more using all the functionality and therefore use the AI tool that comes with what you're already paying for, or maybe at moderate incremental cost, or people sort of going wild and subscribing to everything. So what's the risk on AI? There's the return on investment. What's the ROI on all those passwords and all those license fees and all the time people spent training and with many things? In a few years, you look back and you wonder why you tried the first three. And you might even wonder why you're still paying for two of them, depending on how you've curated. So there's a variety of risks that are present that are around your commercial functionality, around cost, around cyber, and around, back to the labor question, either hiring or renting the talent that can help not only operate, but think through AI.
Looking at the return on investment of AI, probably the thing that I've noticed the most in my own use of AI is that the things that I've actually spent the most money on have actually produced the least return.
Oh, yeah.
There's a very, very strange phenomena going on here. No, I thought, Microsoft Copilot, this is going to be a game changer. Have to take a Copilot subscription. Used it a few times to start off with. I can't actually remember the last time I used Copilot. Now I'm going back to the ChatGPTs and the Claudes that I got for free.
Right. We do find, for example, that's one of those risks is choosing perhaps the right tool. And we have all of that here too. And as we present the results of these surveys to CFOs, either in a particular company or in a large setting, we tend to get a show of hands and find that a lot of people are using a lot of things. What's interesting though, if you think about that survey of finance executives where we saw that it was 34% of the respondents said they were using AI. That was 44% of the public companies and 29% of the private companies. So you can see why a public company might be more likely to use it. They've got quarterly forecasting, they're larger, they've got bigger budgets. But about 2/3 of them said that using it, and arguably they're conflating AI with automation too, right? They're considering it all one topic, said that they were saving money. So if that were, say, a daily tracking poll, and we took it, and I expect when we take our survey for CFOs in May or June of this year, that number is going to be higher because that sort of word gets out. It catches on. People talk about it at conferences, and suddenly people realize that, wow, they could use AI to do some of their payment processing, or they could use it to match cash applications in a virtual lockbox, things that cost money, or they're using maybe a third-party service provider. They've probably been using it for online three-way match of invoice, shipping document, and purchase order for years and not knowing it was AI. So the real question is, there's some of the stuff that seems exciting and more interesting and probably doesn't save that much money, but people want to have it. And then there are some fairly down-to-earth, rudimentary activities in finance where the use of AI can automate, and you can measure that result. Either, and I wouldn't say by having less heads in accounting, but by being able to maybe do more with the same, or do more with only a little more, or deal with the fact that it's harder to find accountants and use it as an offset to the supply and demand problem you have in hiring. So it's an area that clearly requires watching, and I think caution as companies start to dabble, finance functions in particular, but really sales organizations and marketing groups that want to have AI be part of their sales process. And I should have mentioned this earlier too, in the risks on AI, just like in ESG, there's the risk of greenwashing, and there have been comment letters and fines for people who have voluntarily reported inaccurate data. There is a risk of AI washing as well. Over describing your AI platform in a public filing or a sales document, and then having somebody who's a regulator or an interested party who's allowed to ask you to back that up, and being unable to do so. So AI washing is another area. And CFOs, as the reporting persona in all organizations, public and private, need to concern themselves with that as well.
That's an interesting one, AI washing. It's something I hadn't considered at all. And I get the greenwashing because there's so much pressure to report ESG and to say that you are being appropriately sustainable and so on. Get the greenwashing. But nobody's saying, you have got to use AI.
Yet.
The only place I can see it at the moment is that somebody is going to buy a product. You're a tech company. You're probably going to be looking at all the sales material to say, is this product AI enabled, or is it going to be AI enabled versus its competitor?
Marketing and recruiting for starters, right? AI in all the job titles.
Yep.
And if you look and you realize that the job description hasn't changed, those are some dead giveaways. Marketing, but also when you start thinking about in the future, as the market starts to value companies, if an AI company gets a different multiple than a non-AI company, and the instinct is to say, we are an AI company in your public filing. And if that drives the stock price up in a way that it shouldn't have, that's where the risk comes in. So it will likely come in the form of how companies describe or over-describe themselves. and their products and their services and their platforms. So, but it is an emerging risk. And it's been discussed by some of the regulators as something they're keeping an eye on, just as they did with ESG. So.
But I think ESG is an area that AI in itself is going to make a big impact into. And all of that non-financial data that you need to crunch and analyze and look through for sustainability issues, environmental issues, and so on. I think we're seeing that's an area where we're going to have some really, really big changes.
They're related too. AI is an ESG issue.
Yeah.
The responsible use of AI, the data security, all that. So they are related topics too.
Yeah. So, Chris, we've talked about that big one, the economic conditions. We've talked about labor. We've talked about AI. The other big one we touched upon, but never really talked about in much detail, is cyber threat. It's up there at number 2 in the list. Now, cyber threats have been around for a long, long time. Systems get better, more secure. We know more about cyber attacks. Shouldn't this risk be going down the table rather than still at the top?
Kevin, in a perfect world, it would, but the bad actors get better at what they do as well.
That's true.
Right. And so here's an interesting conundrum. In the US, for the last year or so, public companies have had to describe in their periodic filings their approach to a cyber incident, what they would do and how they would do it. And then if something happens, they have to determine if it's material and report it within 4 days. But the description of what they do and how they do it, they had to be cautious about how much they say so as not to publish a roadmap for the bad actor. Right. And so unfortunately, cyber hackers, cyber criminals are also improving their skills with every passing day. And it's a perpetual effort to stay ahead or to react and hope that something that just happened to somebody doesn't happen to them again or to you. It doesn't appear that it will go away because of the activity on both sides of that protective fence, if you will.
Yeah. Now, we talked about AI becoming a big thing. Now, a lot of AI works because the information is in the cloud.
Right.
Chances are, if it's in the cloud, then it's not on your own company server. It's on a Google Drive or an Amazon AWS or something like that.
It's off-prem.
It's off-prem.
Yeah.
So how does that translate into the sort of disaster recovery scenario of the normal company? Because there's less and less and less that they are actually physically going to do something with to recover. It's down to Amazon to put the stuff back or Google to put the stuff back.
Kevin, cloud has been one of those issues as well. It was our separate survey of CFOs. It was viewed as a way that companies have saved money by going to the cloud. It was number 8 on their top 10 list last year as a concern, likely because of that. And of course, there's a cyber element to that. Whose cloud? How good is your cloud provider? What's their perimeter? So yeah, it's a great way to cut down on maintenance and always have the most current version, to always have access to the greatest experts for the cloud providers, but it creates another chain of accountability. You can't outsource the responsibility, but you are outsourcing that part of your data management. And so the ability to assess the risk of dealing with the particular cloud provider, what is their approach to a cyber incident? If take it to that SEC US example, how would they alert you to their awareness of an issue so that you could appropriately report it within the 5 requisite days of understanding materiality to your shareholders? It adds another level of complexity to the CFO's daily life and work, and also ups the ante on their relationship with their CISO if they have one, or their CIO if they don't, where they need to be not co-equal C-suite executives, but also partners in data protection and data curation. It made the list for CFOs only, both as a concern and an area of opportunity. And it is not surprising, but also it adds a level to the accountability chain without absolving the organization or the CFO of that organization from the responsibility. Because quite often, the ERP with the financial data is one of those things that's on the cloud. The data you most want to protect, other than perhaps IP if you're a heavily patented or trademarked organization, but certainly the financial data and the access to your accounts and earnings releases prior to release, that sort of thing is an area where CFOs are finding both concern and opportunity, obviously, as you've mentioned, with good reason.
Yeah, and that certainly gives us some things to think about. And I'm thinking about GrowCFO, just ourselves. No? Accounts are in Xero.
Sure.
Xero's cloud. All the documents are in Google Drive. Gives us things to think about Google. No? Backing up your local machine's not good enough anymore.
Right, and that's added to that IT finance partnership that either exists or needs to. to properly function, or at least optimally function.
And then there's a whole learning management platform, because we are a company that trains finance leaders and their teams.
Yeah.
All of that learning management stuff is in our web provider's cloud, which also happens to be Google. But no, do we actually have any data stored ourselves? No, we don't. And I think in this day and age, that's going to be 99% of companies now.
Then it always runs the question, well, then who does have it? And how financially viable is your cloud provider? What if they failed for some reason? Obviously, you haven't mentioned any that aren't largely financially sound, right? So, but do you take a chance on a new player with your financial data? That's one of those risk management activities.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's definitely a thought that you might see. Certainly, there are some new accounting solutions coming along that are saying tech stack. CFOs, you're always talking about your tech stack. Is tech stack the right thing to have these days?
Yeah.
Look at our solution. It's all in one. You don't have a stack of different apps. But no, those people have still then got to show that they're viable. They're going to last long term, because they're asking you to put even more data in their solution. So yeah.
And that's where some of the blocking and tackling comes in. And make sure that provider has all the audit reports they need and all the operational reports, and you've seen them and they're current. They're from a firm you've heard of, right? Those are always good things to have in mind. Make sure it's Big Four or next few auditor, right? Where you've got somebody you're comfortable with. So.
Yeah. And there are so many fintech startups. So be careful. They're not all going to be around next year or the year after. Chris, I'm sure we could go on talking all day about these areas, because they are all fascinating. Every one of them's probably worth a podcast in itself, and we've crammed in 4 or 5 different topics within the scope of this talk. Chris, thank you very much for being this week's guest on the GrowCFO Show.
It's been a pleasure, Kevin. Thank you.